There was a whole lot of spending going on this morning. Of course, that's because we got a lot of economic data, so they had to give it the treatment. Core inflation, remember, core inflation had plateaued, right, for a while, and now it's actually edging a little bit higher. But, I mean, who cares, right? Because here's the headline: the number was better than consensus. Meanwhile, income and spending, well, they grew less than expected. It's another indication in my mind that consumers are fatigued. And it matches a whole lot of other signs of caution. I want to bring in Heritage Foundation public economist E.J. Antoni. And E.J., we're celebrating the third revision that the Street did this week, the third revision of the second quarter GDP, and a lot of yawning over the day's data. Which shows income and spending missing the mark. Also, though, they're moving a little bit lower here. Just your thoughts overall on what the data is telling you.
Well, Charles, one of the things that's really concerning for me in this report is, not only did we get revisions on the last couple of months, but with the recent BEA revision of the last several years, we can now see that government transfers have been adding much more to consumer spending than we previously believed, about $200 billion more. That's roughly 5% of the total. And we should remember that these transfer payments, that includes things like welfare, they are not actually included in the GDP component we call government spending. That's just direct purchases by government. So you have to throw in all of this additional taxpayer money on top of that to see how much government is really juicing this economy. Sadly, so much of what we consider consumer spending or private spending really isn't.
Yeah, and people know that, right? I mean, economists try to convince people they're doing much better than they are. And to your point, it is even starting to show up in credit card data. We saw this lately, the most recent stuff from Bank of America, which I love their weekly data. Overall, it was flat. But the only reason it was flat, iPhone orders through the roof, and that kind of carried, that one area. But every other line on there, deep in the red. And it just, again, it signals that American consumers are really starting to tighten their belt, maybe because they have no choice.
Charles, I think that's a really good read. We are seeing right now a consumer that is increasingly, at least when we look at the bottom 90% of them, they are increasingly reliant on that credit card debt that you just mentioned and on government transfer payments. So we are seeing less and less of people's ability to actually get by on their own. And it really is that top 10% or so of consumers, of really high income earners, who have been carrying this market kind of in a very similar way, Charles, to how the Magnificent Seven have really been holding up the broader equity markets for much of this year.
Yeah, let's talk about a recession. Bloomberg's chief economist saying now there's a 70% chance the U.S. economy is recession bound. Where do you put the odds?
I'd say that's about right, Charles. I mean, unfortunately, the odds are really higher than that, just depending on how long you want to stretch out your time horizon. The reason I give that caveat is because you can put off a technical recession for a very long time if the government is willing to spend, borrow, and print enough money. But you're really just kicking the can down the road. And sadly, we're seeing the latest example of that right now in terms of Congress just passing yet another continuing resolution, yet another case of business as usual when it comes to spending too much money. Again, this is kicking the can down the road. It's not solving any of our underlying problems.
I wonder about that, EJ. I was thinking about that today. Like, what project out there has been taking the longest to complete, right? Because Congress began kicking this can down the road a long time ago. And I was thinking about this cathedral, right? The Antoni Gaudi Cathedral. I think they began it in the late 1800s, still not finished, because it just feels like they're never going to do their job. It really does. But I mean, when we say this, why should people care if it doesn't feel like it matters anymore?
Well, Charles, I think it's because we have really glossed over what the effects of this overspending actually is. If you're wondering, where did government actually get the trillions of dollars in excess spending that we've seen over the last several years? They have taken it out of your hide through the hidden tax of inflation. If you're wondering, why are we in a cost of living crisis today? Why is it that young people can never afford a home, probably for the rest of their lives? Why is it that so many young Americans today have given up on on the dream of retirement, it's because you are paying for all of this runaway government spending. We have turned ourselves at this point into a nation of debt slaves, where somewhere around half of all personal income taxes sent to the federal government are effectively used just to pay interest on the debt. And that's getting worse every single month, by the way. So if you think that this doesn't affect you, think again. The problem is, I think that the politicians, Charles, have just gotten really good at hiding the effects.
Yeah, and Americans need to know that $1 trillion in interest payments are going to the richest people in this country and the richest people in other countries. We're taking hard-earned taxpayer money and we're paying the wealthiest people in the world. It's a hell of a transfer of wealth, and it really, really at some point should spark some sort of a revolt or pushback in this country. EJ, thank you so much. Always appreciate your analysis.